Hey everyone, it's Brian, and remember in the introductory lesson to Latin America, we mentioned that there are 13 independent nations in the Caribbean? Great, because I'm about to ask you 2 questions about those Caribbean countries. Now, there's no penalty if you missed a question. I mean, this isn't a pop quiz or anything, more like a bell ringer about today's learning. So, get ready. First, approximately how many people do you think live in those 13 independent Caribbean nations? And second, about 3/4 of the Caribbean's population live on only 2 islands. Can you name those 2 islands? Ponder those for just a moment and we'll be right back with the answers. Alright, let's see how you did. Okay, going back to the first question, you were asked to guess the population for the 13 independent Caribbean nations. The answer is approximately 40 million. How'd your answer stack up? That was a hard one for sure. The total population of the Caribbean islands, that's independent nations and islands that are territories or a commonwealth of another country, is estimated at about 44 million. However, roughly 90% of the Caribbean's residents live in one of those 13 independent nations. As for the second question, I told you that about 3/4 of the Caribbean's population lives on only 2 islands and asked you to attempt to name them. Do you have your answers? Okay, I have to admit, that was a bit of a trick question. Cuba has just over 11 million residents, as does Haiti, and the Dominican Republic has almost 11 million inhabitants. If you remember from a previous lesson, Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the island of Hispaniola, so about 33 million Caribbeans, 75% of that 44 million, live on the 2 islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. The rest of the Caribbean is more sparsely populated. Jamaica has 2.7 million people, followed by Trinidad and Tobago with 1.3 million. All other Caribbean nations have fewer than 400,000 inhabitants, including the Bahamas. We mentioned earlier that only about 10% of the Caribbean's population lives on the islands that are part of another nation. The most populated of those, by far, is the U.S. Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, which has about 2.9 million residents, all of whom are U.S. citizens. All other Caribbean colonial territories have fewer than 400,000 inhabitants. Almost 3/4 of the Caribbean's 44 million residents live in an urban area. Santo Domingo, capital of the Dominican Republic, is the largest city at 3.6 million people, while Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Havana, Cuba, and San Juan, Puerto Rico are the other Caribbean cities with more than 2 million inhabitants. In those cities, languages vary. While many consider Spanish the predominant language of Latin America, in the Caribbean it's the official language of only Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Of course, those are 2 of the 3 most populated nations in the Caribbean. In several places, such as Puerto Rico, you may hear both Spanish and English. It may surprise you to learn that English is the official language of most independent Caribbean nations. 10, in fact. The Bahamas, Jamaica, Barbados, Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Saint Islands, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Kitts and Nevis, all speak English, which is also used in the British and U.S. territories of the region. French and Dutch are the official languages of their territories in the Caribbean, and if you're in Haiti, you'll probably hear Creole, a unique blend of French dialects and African languages. French is also an official language of Haiti. Those languages reflect the history and ancestry of its people. You learned in previous lessons that disease devastated the indigenous peoples of Latin America. In fact, following Columbus' first landing in the Caribbean in 1492, most natives were gone as a result of those diseases and harsh treatment from Europeans by 1600, just over a century later. As a result, most of the Caribbean is descended from a blend of enslaved Africans, colonial Europeans, and indigenous survivors. The islands also have many Asian peoples who came for work in the 19th century after slavery was abolished. The result is that each island, whether an independent nation or colonial territory, possesses its own unique subculture, including food, music, traditions, and the aforementioned languages. Because so many Caribbean islands were used in the slave trade, there is a heavy African influence in the culture of most. For example, calypso music from Trinidad has roots in the Caribbean plantations worked in years past by African slaves, but is certainly a large part of modern culture in the islands today. The most obvious example of African influence on Caribbean culture is found in Haiti. In addition to helping shape the unique Creole language, you can spot African aspects of culture in their food, dress, and music. Remember, too, that Haiti gained independence as a result of a slave uprising. The European influence is obvious, in part due to the languages spoken in the Caribbean. Those languages remain in place on many islands because of their affiliation with European settlers from decades and even centuries ago. Take, for example, the ABC Islands of the Netherlands, located near the coast of Venezuela. Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, thus the ABC, are self-governing islands that remain a Dutch territory. France maintains control over the Caribbean islands of Martinique, Saint Martin, and Guadeloupe. Like Canada, Jamaica and the Bahamas are part of the British Commonwealth, but are independent nations. British territories include the Cayman Islands, Montserrat, the Turks and Caicos, and the British Virgin Islands. Of course, the U.S. has its own Virgin Islands, which, like Puerto Rico, is a U.S. territory. And like Puerto Rico, the residents of the Virgin Islands are full U.S. citizens. While the Caribbean is a place that most everyone wants to visit, it isn't always paradise to those who live there. Most of the Caribbean is relatively poor despite the continual influx of tourism dollars from around the world. Why is that, you may ask? Because the islanders generally work in low-paying jobs at Caribbean hotels, airports, cruise ship terminals, restaurants, and tourist attractions. Businesses related to tourism are almost exclusively owned by foreign companies, which means profits go overseas. Most individuals who don't work in tourism-related business earn meager pay as an agricultural worker. While much of the rich volcanic soil on several Caribbean islands washes into the sea, enough is left in many places for abundant crops such as sugarcane, bananas, coconuts, cocoa, rice, and cotton. Sugarcane plantations in particular offer many jobs, but the work is seasonal, as workers often toil for about 4 months and then must seek alternate means of income for the other 8 months of the year. Islanders serve as farm labor in working sugar or other crops or in the processing of the harvest. Employees are needed to refine sugar and other products, then package them for shipping. Dock workers load and ship the goods. It is all hard work and none pays exceptionally well. To offer a comparison, let's look at the 2019 gross domestic product per capita of some Caribbean nations along with the U.S., according to the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook database. GDP, as you remember, is the total value of products produced by a nation, so GDP per capita is that same value divided by the total number of people. The U.S., as you might expect, ranks fairly high worldwide at just over $65,000. GDP per capita in the Bahamas is the best in the Caribbean at just over $33,000, but it plummets quickly from there. Barbados is slightly above $18,000, while Trinidad and Tobago's GDP per capita is just over $16,300. The drop-off becomes more startling when you look at the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and especially Haiti. Other Caribbean nations not listed are similar to countries in this group and do not approach the wealth of the Bahamas. Other data, such as average income or median wealth, tell much the same story. Despite being a place of immense beauty visited by millions annually, most residents of the Caribbean are far from wealthy, and many live in poverty. To provide for their families, many farm workers migrate to other Caribbean islands, Central America, or the U.S. in search of work. Money is often sent home in the form of remittances, which you learned about in a previous lesson. Remittances from the U.S. and other places of employment are helping to transform and modernize the islands of the Caribbean. $80 billion, yeah, $80 billion with a B, was sent to Latin America in 2016 alone, much of it to the Caribbean. Migration from the islands is nothing new. During construction of the Panama Canal in the early 1900s, thousands left their island homes for a steady paycheck. Puerto Ricans have long utilized their U.S. citizenship to move to the American mainland in search of a better life. From 2010 through 2013 alone, more than 144,000 Puerto Ricans left the Caribbean to find a new life in the United States. Perhaps the most controversial mass migration from the Caribbean occurred in 1980, as some 125,000 Cubans fled their homeland for the U.S. Called the Freedom Flotilla, it was later revealed that many arriving in Florida had been released from Cuban jails and mental institutions. Mass exodus from Cuba occurred again after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, which ended Soviet financial aid to communist Cuba. Haiti has a history of heavy migration to the U.S. Many Haitians seek to escape the nation's bleak economic outlook, political instability, and devastation from earthquakes and tropical storms. Despite the weekly migrations of thousands to the Caribbean for vacations, it's likely that the migration from the islands will continue. Caribbean workers are heavily reliant on tourism and farming for an income. Neither pay as well, and opportunities will be sought elsewhere. As you learned today, a wide disparity in economic stability exists from nation to nation in the Caribbean. The future of the region is largely tied to continued tourism and investment. If fewer of the profits go overseas and more remain in the islands, prosperity for islanders becomes more possible. Of course, whether and when that actually occurs remains to be seen. What is for certain is that with the warm blue waters, white sands, and enticing climates, the Caribbean will continue to grow as a tourist destination. Until next time, keep exploring.